Hello and most welcome to 1887 of the 8 series. We would today continue with Wittgenstein's private language investigation. But there is by Francis Wittgenstein. But there is also something particular with today's number, 1887. Does it ring a bell, Kalle?
Yes, the Morley experiment of 1887 about the light.
Indeed.
MM.
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 Morrison Morley of 1887, where physics as we know it changed completely. We came to realize that the speed of light is constant. It neither decreases nor increases. This was a big earthquake for the pillars, the foundational pillars of classical physics as we know it. Last time we took a good look at criterion, something that we gone into earlier on. What is a criterion? Why is it so important for understanding to be possible? So criterion is of great importance. It makes it possible for language to mean something. It needs to be active, not passive. To make a connection to the Morrison-Morley experiment that paved the road for the coming of quantum mechanics. What enters really is the role of the observer. Without an activity, without a criterion, without a stage setting, there will be no difference. We will not be able to tell anything apart anymore. This is at the very zest of the private language argument. The necessity, the absolute necessity of outsideness, of criteria. We also looked at, could that or those criterions, could they possibly be the physical world? Well, only if we with the physical world means us and the physical together. And thereby Francis Wittgenstein, and I would say Wittgenstein himself, took a big step away from the idea of that physicality in itself could mean something, or have the possibility of bringing in Derridian difference. Criterions are an absolute necessity for remembering, telling apart, and, very important, also realizing sameness. I'd say none of those things would actually be possible without the re-entering So 1887, one could say that the first fetus, if you like, of the observer role was born. The same goes for Wittgenstein and the criterion. It's the entering of the observer. I will continue where we left off last time. Before MMM theory, Morrison-Morley, in episode 1885, page 269. It's the penultimate paragraph on page 269. Wittgenstein's answer given in PI 258 is that in the diary case, there is no criterion of correctness. But why is there no criterion of correctness here? Unfortunately, Wittgenstein does not provide an explicit explanation. The memory challenge discussed earlier forces itself on us here again. Why can't the private diarist treat his memory of the initial sensation as a sample, assuming that his memory is reliable for a short period, and use it to judge whether a later sentence is also read or S. Put a little pause here. In fact, a memory of past sensation is essential for public language. Suppose that I'm shown a color sample and am told that it is called red. I then turn around and see a rose I can say that it is red too. In this case, the sample is not in front of me, so I do not compare the rows with a sample directly. What I do is somehow compare my current visual sensation of the rows with my memory of the sensation of the sample and judge that the rose is red. Red. Memory of past sensations is also indispensable, even in the case where one looks at the sample at different times. Suppose that I hold a red sample in my hand. Look at it. Blink my eyes and then look at it again and again and again. Of course, I can say that the sample is still red. But how can I? I must somehow compare my current visual sensation with my memory of the previous visual sensation and judge that the sample is still red. As for how I compare these two visual sensations and make a judgment must be a matter of psychology. Certain psychological mechanisms must be at work here. Indeed. I am so constructed that these two visual sensations are of the same nature. That is red to me. Another creature might feel that these two visual sensations are different, perhaps as different as the sensations I get when I look at a rose and then at the blue sky. And I might use two different color names for them. For them, for them, for them. It is therefore undeniable the memory of past sensations and certain psychological mechanisms enable us to use the word red in ordinary life. If they enable our public use of red, why can't they allow the private diarist to use his private word red? Yes, why? At T1, the diarist has a sensation S1, and he calls it red. Or S. At T1, the diarist has a sensation S1, and he calls it red. At T2, he still clearly remembers S1, and now he has S2. Can't some psychological mechanisms make S2 and his memory of S1 match so that he judges that S2 is red or S2? Indeed, a question. Here, the diarist is captivated by the analogy between public language and private language, which is the reason why he thinks that his private language is possible. Wittgenstein seems to be aware of this as he writes, perhaps a logician will think the same is the same. How an identity is established is a psychological question. Indeed. Indeed it is. But Wittgenstein apparently disagrees with the logician or philosopher. He repeatedly asks about how we compare two sensations or images in an attempt to fight against the temptation of the logician to invoke psychological mechanism to explain the identity between the two sensations or images. Indeed, images, images, images. From where do they stem? There seems to be a strong analogy between the use of red in a public language and that of red in a private language. But does this analogy really hold? To answer this question, we must first examine what it means to say that two sensations are the same. Therein lies the kernel of the poodle. Same, echo. The two sensations are the same can mean two things. One is that two sensations are physically the same. And the other being that they are not physically the same, but are qualitatively the same. That is, they are of the same type. Let us investigate these two cases in turn. If I look at a red sample at two different times, I get two visual sensations. Can the two sensations be physically identical? It is not unreasonable to understand a visual sensation in terms of activation of neurons in the brain. In the brain. In the brain. Is it possible that at these two times, the same neurons in my brain get activated? To the same degree? It is scarcely possible. One reason is that at these two times, the positions of my eyes are highly unlikely to be completely the same. So are the lightning conditions. Another reason is that during the interval, some neurons which got activated may die and new ones may emerge. Voila! Therefore, it is
Emerge.
highly unlikely that on these two occasions, the same neurons get activated.
Activated.
And are activated in the same way. This is to say that the two visual sensations are highly unlikely to be the same.
Physically.
Physically, I was just waiting for that. High unlikelihood is not the same as logical impossibility. It is logically possible that the two sensations are the same down to every minute detail. But listen now. But even if the two sensations are physically the same, no one can really know this. Even if it is discovered with the most advanced devices, that the same neurons are activated and are activated to the same degree. It is possible that there are still differences that have not been detected by the devices. Devices.
Devices.
Without the aid of such devices, it is even more impossible for a person to know that the two sensations are physically the same. So it is meaningless to talk about two sensations being physically the same. It only makes sense to speak of two sensations as being qualitatively the same, of the same sensation type. Now, when I look at a red sample at two different times, my visual sensations are physically different. When I look at a red sample and then a rose, my visual sensations are also physically different. When I look at a red sample and then a rose, my visual sensations are also physically different. But on both occasions, I can say, I see red. In doing so, I put the two physically different sensations in the same group, under the same label. As I said a few paragraphs back, this cannot be done without memory and certain psychological mechanisms.
Mechanisms.
Indeed, people do see red. And scientists have, by doing certain experiments on people's visual system, on many seeing red occasions, discovered that humans have color mechanisms which are sensitive to wavelengths of light, and that red corresponds to light with a predominant wavelength of roughly
620 to 920 nanometers. Now consider the diary case. The private diarist's sensations are severed from the physical world. At T1, he has S1, and at T2, he has S2. Since S1 and S2 are physically different, according to what can the diarist say that they are both S?
I think it's
The diarist cannot point to a physical object and say that S1 and S2 are both caused by it. There are no physical objects in this case. Which can serve as a criteria of correctness. The diarist at this point might appeal to memory of sensations and psychological mechanisms. Memory and certain mechanisms can enable me to judge two visual sensations to be both red. Why can't they enable me to judge that S1 and S2 are both S? Let us put memory aside for a moment and concentrate on the psychological mechanisms. What psychological mechanisms can be called for?
called for.
Cold. In the case of public language, color mechanisms can be called for to make color judgments.
Judgments.
Tactile mechanisms to judge hardness, coldness, etc., so on and so forth. But in the diarist
case are S1 and S2 both visual sensations? Or is one of them visual and the other tactile? Or one is auditory and the other olfactory? Indeed, olfactory. The diarist's private sensations cannot be of such types. Otherwise, they would be understandable and not private. No psychological mechanism relating to the known senses can be called for to help the diarist judge whether or not S2 is of the same type of S1. The private diarist might concede all this, but he might still not surrender.
Not surrender.
Surrender, Dorothy.
Not surrender.
He might believe that there are possibly certain unknown psychological mechanisms inside him that could enable him to re-identify S sensations. Poor chap. This belief is difficult to remove. For who is to tell that there are no such mechanisms? Scientists have not found such mechanisms, but who is to say that they will definitely not be able to find them in the future? 2,700 maybe. So it seems that the possibility of private language cannot be ruled out. To such a problem, Wittgenstein's typical treatment is this. It seems to be an empirical problem, but it is actually a grammatical one.
Actually, a grammatical one.
Indeed. In the present case, Wittgenstein's point would be it seems to be an empirical issue whether there are certain unknown psychological mechanisms for re-identifying S sensations. But it is actually grammatical nonsense to say that there are such mechanisms. In what follows, I shall try to make this point clear. Clear. Elsewhere in the PI, Wittgenstein says of the philosopher's tendency to invoke hidden processes and states to explain the meanings of certain words. We talk of processes and states and leave their nature undecided. Sometimes perhaps we'll know more about them, we think. In the same passage, he points out that the decisive movement in the conjuring trick has been made, and it was the very one that seemed to us quite innocent. The relevance of these remarks to the problem we are tackling here is this. It is tempting to invoke unknown psychological mechanisms to support the idea of private language. But this movement is in fact the main cause of a philosophical puzzlement about private language. It is this movement that turns a grammatical issue into a seemingly empirical one. And I think that's as a good point as ever, because of course.
Page 273. in PDF with 17, page 17 in PDF. Enter il richiamo. So,
So let's have a look at this. Some outtakes of the text we just read. There are indeed some things here that are well worth considering. We go to page 270, please, Kalle. And at the end of the second paragraph, and here is the zest of the today's problem, 1887. He repeatedly asks how we compare two sensations or images in an attempt to fight against the temptation of the logician to invoke psychological mechanism to explain the identity between two sensations or images. This is the zest of it. The psychologization or making grammatical problems, grammatical confoundments into psychological or empirical ones. That is in a nutshell the misunderstanding of the philosopher. And Lin is very effective on the next page. I think I had never seen such a collection of good arguments against the PLA. The second paragraph on 271. Wow, it's like 6 lines down. And it's about the eyes and the angle. We heard this argument casted in a different form by neurologists quite recently. But I read it. One reason is that at these two times, the positions of my eyes are highly unlikely to be completely the same, and so are the lighting conditions. Reading that, you just come to this smack realization. Sameness is not from inside of us. Because the eyes, the chance are minuscular, if it ever happens during the existence of Earth. But it is even worse than this. I think this first take serves by Lin to undermine the position of the private language interlocutor's argument. Go further down to the third paragraph and third line. But even if the two sensations are physically the same, no one can really know this. This should be put in gold. How could you know, or what can know, that they are the same? What would that stem from? No one knows. But it's supposed to be still self-evident. And let me add here within parentheses, why do people still believe it's an empirical or psychological question? Well, because they never heard these arguments and they never gave it a good thought. Behind the private language argument, the reason is that people haven't thought about it. This is what Wittgenstein does. It gives some extra thinking to these, to give them the pertinency they need. If you go to the, you see here, the next paragraph, I can just say, and it talks about the visual sensations. Like 5 lines down. When I look at a red sample and then a rose, my visual sensations are also physically different. Think about that. They cannot really be the same, but still it's red. And it doesn't help that red has more or less the same wavelength. It will not help. The reason why we can see at page 272 there are no physical objects in this case which can serve as a criteria of correctness. There are none whatsoever. So poor diarist is now in deep waters. He can no longer feel his feet to the bottom. What should the poor guy do? I feel sorry for the interlocutor. At the end of the very same paragraph, we find the following. No psychological mechanisms relating to the known senses can be called for to help the diarist judge whether or not S2 is of the same type as S1. Nothing. Absolutely zilch and zero. This is oddly enough also what got cracked by the Morrison-Morley experiment of 1887. Why? Well, as soon as light became constant, everything else became relative. Size, wavelength, I'm not kidding you, I kid you not. Width, growth, mass, volume, everything in a big smack collapsed in 1887. That's why that that's why that experiment, that discovery was so shaky, because the old world picture where you had this steadiness as the private diarist, that possibility disappeared. So I took the liberty to add another example to the very great ones and more than enough made by Lin. We can go to the bottom of this same page. It is tempting, I start the very last sentence, to invoke unknown psychological mechanisms to support the idea of private language. But this movement is in fact the main cause of the philosophical puzzlement about private language. It is not about empiricism. It is not about psychological factors unknown to us. The whole thing is a grammatical thing and nothing else. Redness comes from grammar. And that's a decisive punch both at idealism and reductionism in one go. The main views of this world, shared by 99.999% of the population in the Western Hemisphere anyway, I'd say be very hard to find any exception to that. This is our shared view, and Wittgenstein puts a big crack into this. And Kalle, please enter, because I know what you're up to there. I saw Leibniz shallowing by.
Here, let me see. Let me see. But you read a phrase. I think it was. Where did we have it? You read a phrase.
Now, when I look at a red sample at two different times, my visual sensations are physically different. Yeah.
No, it was not this one. You read a phrase. Even if the two sensations are physically the same, no one can really know this. Where was this phrase? Let me see. Physically the same.
Well, I can look in my notes. I think that's B.
No, it was not this one.
It's on page 271. Third paragraph.
Yes, let me see.
No, now you're on the fourth paragraph. You need to go up a bit.
Okay. Was it this? No, it wasn't this one.
But there you have it.
Yes.
But even if the two sensations are physically the same, no one can really know this. We have no criterion for telling sameness.
Yes, I think you were too kind here. I think we can actually know this. Didn't Leibniz show with his nomads that's not possible?
Yeah. They don't have any windows. It's very similar, yeah.
So even we could compare perhaps the nomads with rotating crystal glass. What is that in English? Lights, like kind of perhaps like police lights, not kind, but different lights.
Okay.
I don't know. That's my comparison. I don't know. Nomads. They don't have any windows. I don't know. Is that a good explanation?
Yeah, it's very good. I like that. Yeah, you can't tell one
but
from
they're transparent
another.
windows. We could call them transparent windows, rather.
Well, they don't have any windows. Yeah,
Yes, but
transparent
windows is,
windows. You can't look inside of them to tell one from the other.
and they are like an image of how we are, we human beings. And these, so to say, they rotate. They're like primes, what do you call them? These light tubes that rotate. They are never the same, the nomads. You remember we went through the paper by Julian Barbour, where he discussed.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I don't remember the exact point, but I think that was more or less the point that it's always rotating these lights, and they're a picture of us human beings, and we are never the same. We can never be the same. I thought that Leibniz proved this with his nomads.
Yes, yes. You can't tell that one monad is the same from another. There are no criteria, and in a way, that's a reverse private language argument. Very good, Kalle. That's very good. Yeah.
So let me go to page 15. This in PDF. So it's this one. The best phrase. Yes, you read this already, but I think it's, we should actually, we must repeat this because.
Yeah, think about it. Wow.
Yes, indeed. This is a great phrase. One reason is that at these two times, the position of my eyes are highly unlikely to be completely the same. So are the lightning conditions. And now comes, I want to show this. So keep this phrase in mind.
Yes,
I will do my document where this is my treasure trove. Let me see if you can see. Can you see the document?
No.
No. Okay, so I will make a share once more. Here. So here, this is my treasure trove where I collect the best quotations. And here you have Stephen M. Rosen.
Yes.
From his books Dimensions of Apeiron, 2004, and he says on page 18, what Mikkel Samoli discovered was that the velocity of light actually always appeared to be the same, regardless of its direction of motion relative to the observer. What the Mikkel Samoli experiment demonstrated was that when the object being discovered is light, the familiar experience does not apply. It would generally look strange to me if I got up from this computer screen at an acute angle, but found that the screen had the same full square appearance as when I was sitting in front of it. Analogously, this is what Mikkel and Molly saw when they looked at light from different angles, different frames. We don't need to. I know this is a little bit complicated, but I think you, Hans, summarized this excellently earlier, and I think everybody should put this in gold, your summary. Light is constant, everything else is relative. This is the point. So light is constant, everything else is relative. And I want to show another quotation about Mikkel Samoli because it's so easy to actually miss the point. Morley. There is for now the book, not by let me see. Yes, this is actually this is from a biography about Alfred Lowe Whitehead. And there, I saw this quotation to you perhaps 6 months ago or something like that. And then we read Wittgenstein suggested that if matter was electrical in nature, a body moving through the electromagnetic ether might contract in a way that would explain the negative results of the Mikkel-Samoli experiment of 1887. By 1897, it appeared that Newtonian physics was not at all secure, but Whitehead called this crumbling of the scientific rock one of his crucial experiences of his life. So this was really, Whitehead understood that this was something great. I don't know. This has a mistake. I think it's
Well, it's just earth moving. The Michelson Morley is earth moving. It's beyond belief, and nobody out there, philosophers, logicians, know the implications of it. But with the help of Wittgenstein, it becomes so much easier to explain it.
So this is so Whitehead understood the importance of this discovery.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah.
No, it was actually 1997, but I don't know why he jumped 10 years there. But it's okay. Anyhow, so let's. I think we could almost end there. I could read this with emphasis. This last phrase.
Oh yeah, yeah, do that. Very good.
So one reason is that these two times the positions of my eyes are highly unlikely to be completely the same. So are the lightning conditions.
Indeed. Very good. Thank you very much for participating, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you for your comments. I loved Leibniz turning up again. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Have a most excellent morning, day, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye for now.
Lightning conditions.